Welcome to Wealth and Means, advice dressed up like hard work.
Thank you to our listeners in Bangladesh, Brazil, Germany, Guatemala, Israel, Iraq, Japan, Singapore, South Korea, South Africa, the USA, and Vietnam. It's episode 41. Let's get into it.
This week, we're looking at what sits underneath the thing everyone's already talking about. A trade map nobody's signed yet, a synthetic cell nobody's sure is alive, a housing company about to trade in public for the first time, and a Steelers locker room learning a new coach's cadence. All of it filed under what you didn't see in the news. Then we walk the week ahead in Wake Up Ready, a Fed chair who just told Congress inflation's days are numbered, two of the summer's biggest earnings reports landing on the same night, and a tariff deadline that's already been delayed once and probably won't be the last time we say that. After that, a knowledge bomb on why your resume might be talking to a machine before it ever reaches a person, a Humor Me segment on the planet's quietly improving fundamentals, a greater debate between Socrates and Nietzsche on whether examining your own life saves it or slowly drains it, and we close with Let's Invent Again, the man who made a fortune finding value in what everyone else called laboratory residue.
Every segment this week is really the same question asked 6 different ways. What's holding this up that you can't see from the headline?
Let's go.
Each week, we explore ideas that help you pause, reflect, and think more deeply about the opportunities all around you.
It's the perfect mix. A little information, a few stats, some real-world insights, and just enough deep talk to make you feel smarter before your second cup of coffee. A quick thank you to our sponsor, agentweekly.ai, chronicling the absurd, the ambitious, and the algorithmically challenged corners of the AI agent economy. The trade story worth watching isn't another tariff threat. It's the quiet construction of an alternative map. The European Union and India are moving toward formally signing their trade agreement by the end of the year, after years of stop-start negotiations. Together, they represent a market of roughly 2 billion people. The hook here is that this isn't old-style globalization trying to put everyone under one rulebook. It's targeted alignment. Trade, services, labor mobility, security, and supply chain insurance between 2 large blocks that want more room to maneuver. It matters because companies may increasingly build around a handful of dependable corridors rather than one frictionless global system. It surfaced this week because the signing timetable just became concrete enough for businesses to plan around. India's Commerce Minister confirmed the end-of-year signing target on July 16th, with the deal expected to take effect in the first quarter of 2027.
Globalization didn't disappear. It just got tired of group projects and started forming smaller, more productive teams.
That same instinct is playing out inside the Gulf. Saudi Arabia and the UAE aren't merely neighbors with large sovereign wealth funds. They're competing to become the default regional address for capital, headquarters, logistics, tourism, and high-end talent. Saudi Arabia has scale, population, and its Vision 2030 push. The UAE has a deep commercial base, financial infrastructure, and a reputation for moving fast. The overlooked fact is that this is also a contest over resilience. Ports, pipelines, data centers, and trade routes are becoming competitive advantages in their own right. Why it matters is that global firms will increasingly have to choose a Gulf strategy, not just a Gulf office. It drew attention this week as investors re-examined where money's being deployed while regional risks keep raising the value of optionality.
Friendly competition's a generous phrase for 2 neighbors racing to become the world's default zip code.
Now, take that same desire for optionality and shrink it down to the phone in your pocket. Apple's AI strategy is increasingly a bet that not every intelligent task should travel to a distant data center. More of it can happen on-device, using the chips already inside a phone, tablet, or laptop. The news here isn't that Apple discovered privacy. That's been the company's vocabulary for years. The more interesting question is economic. If AI happens locally, who pays for the compute, who owns the data, and how much does the next hardware upgrade actually matter? This is gaining attention now because AI is forcing consumers to ask whether their current devices are merely old or suddenly underpowered.
The cloud's convenient right up until it becomes a monthly bill with opinions about your private life.
From on-device intelligence to something much stranger, a cell-like system assembled in a laboratory. Researchers behind a preprint called Spud Cell say they've built a synthetic biological system capable of unusually lifelike functions, including a form of reproduction. University of Minnesota scientists report it can feed, grow, copy its own DNA, and divide across roughly 5 generations using only components whose identities and quantities are fully known. The necessary caution is the story. This is a preprint, not a settled declaration that scientists have manufactured life, and it was actually turned down by one peer-reviewed journal after a reviewer argued it wasn't real biology. But it's a meaningful advance in the attempt to build biological machinery from defined parts, running on a genome of just 90 kilobase pairs, smaller than scientists thought a minimal genome could be. Why it matters is that the long-term prize isn't philosophical theater. It's programmable biology, new ways to make medicines, chemicals, materials, or sensors. It caught attention this week because the public's being asked to confront a question that used to belong mostly to science fiction. What exactly counts as alive?
And reassuringly, the first question humans ask about a new form of life is still, can it be monetized before peer review?
A second science story is less existential, but may prove more immediately useful. Researchers from ETH Zurich and EPFL just published results on a detector concept called Platon, which uses a block of light-producing material, a light field camera, ultra-sensitive photon sensors, and artificial intelligence to reconstruct particle paths in 3 dimensions. In simulations, it could replace a complicated forest of tiny detector components with a single, far more scalable block, reaching spatial resolution better than a millimeter inside a 10-centimeter cube. The interesting part isn't the acronym, it's the possibility that better scientific measurement can come from simplifying the machine rather than adding more pieces to it. The potential applications stretch from hunting weakly interacting particles like neutrinos to sharper PET imaging in hospitals. It's on the radar because the work was announced just this past week, and tools that make invisible events measurable often matter long before the public notices the discoveries they enable.
Turns out the future of particle physics might be fewer parts, not more. Someone should really tell my garage.
Consumer behavior has its own strange physics. The quieter food signal is black sesame. Google says searches for it are higher than ever this year, especially in desserts, with black sesame ice cream and cookies breaking out beyond their established cultural homes. The point isn't that America's discovered sesame seeds. It's that a familiar ingredient can become newly valuable when it offers 3 things at once: distinct flavor, visual identity, and a story that isn't manufactured in a marketing meeting. Black sesame's nutty, dark, recognizable on camera, and deeply rooted in Asian culinary traditions. The business lesson is that consumer novelty doesn't always mean invention. Often, it just means a broader market finally learning to value something that was never new in the first place. It gained attention this week as the trend crossed over from search behavior into restaurant and retail coverage.
The best trend forecasts are usually just someone else's normal breakfast, arriving late to the American algorithm.
That brings us to Cannes, where the film industry made a revealing admission. Creators aren't just people to invite onto a red carpet anymore. The Cannes film market launched its first ever Creator Economy Summit this year, while Cannes Lions built dedicated programming around the business of influence, drawing more than 250 creators into official festival programming, the most in the event's history. That's not a cultural courtesy call. It's an acknowledgement that creators now bring audiences, formats, distribution, and sometimes financing that traditional studios can't manufacture on command. Why it matters is that Hollywood's next talent pipeline may not run only through agencies, film schools, and casting offices. It may run through creator-led franchises with existing trust and built-in reach. The story's surfacing now in the post-con debrief, as executives translate the event's symbolism into actual deal structures.
When the red carpet starts taking meetings with the ring light, you know the org chart's changed.
One useful case study is Rotten Mango, Stephanie Sue's narrative-led true crime franchise. The show's significance isn't simply that true crime remains popular. Plenty of true crime shows exist. Rotten Mango's become notable because it combines research, recognizable storytelling, visual packaging, and a format audiences understand before they even press play. That creates something that looks less like a podcast and more like a durable media property. The second-order implication is that the future of niche media may not belong to the loudest host or the broadest feed. It may belong to creators who can make expertise feel like a familiar destination. This came up this week because the industry's looking for examples of niche authority that can survive when generic conversation shows are increasingly interchangeable.
In other words, the moat's no longer just having a microphone. It's giving people a reason to cross it every week.
Sports gives us a different version of that same problem. The Pittsburgh Steelers are beginning life after Mike Tomlin, with Mike McCarthy preparing for his first training camp at a franchise that's had only 4 head coaches since 1969. Tomlin resigned in January after nearly 2 decades of continuity, and McCarthy, a Pittsburgh native who took last season off after 5 years in Dallas, inherits not just a roster and a playbook, but an institutional expectation that Pittsburgh is supposed to know exactly what it is. Players are already noticing the difference. Practices now start an hour later, and one Steelers tight end described a shift from what he called constant tension in the air under Tomlin to something looser under McCarthy. That's why this is more than a regional football story. Organizations that build their identity around stability often discover that succession is their least practiced skill. It's getting attention now because training camp turns a years-long legacy into a visible new operating model, with pads going on August 3rd and no more off-season left to blame the transition on.
Nothing tests an institution's identity quite like discovering the institution was actually just one very patient man.
In housing, the market's about to put a number on a very old promise that homes can be built more like products. Boxable completed its business combination with FG Merger 2 this past week at an implied valuation of roughly $3.5 billion, with trading under the ticker BXBL set to begin Monday on the NASDAQ. The company's argument is factory-built modular housing that can be produced faster and potentially cheaper than conventional construction. Its flagship casita is a 361-square-foot unit with a full kitchen and bathroom that unfolds on-site in under an hour. The reason this matters isn't that one public listing will solve housing affordability. It won't. The real question is whether the company can turn a compelling factory floor demonstration into permitting, financing, site work, utility connections, and neighborhood-scale delivery. It popped this week because the public market's about to judge a housing thesis that private investors have only been able to admire from a safer distance.
Every housing solution eventually meets the same final boss, a permit office that hasn't seen the pitch deck yet.
General Fusion is making an even longer duration promise available to public investors. The Canadian fusion energy company completed its transaction with Spring Valley Acquisition Corp. 3 this past week and began trading on the NASDAQ as GFUZ, becoming the first publicly listed pure-play fusion company, with shares up roughly 40% since the debut. Its technology is experimental, its commercial timeline reaches toward 2028 for key milestones and the mid-2030s for real power, and fusion still hasn't produced commercially viable electricity anywhere in the world. Those aren't footnotes, they're the story. Public markets are now being asked to finance a scientific ambition whose payoff, if it arrives, may belong to another decade. Why it matters is that energy scarcity has made investors more willing to fund technologies once considered too distant for public ownership. It gained attention this week after strong early trading reminded everyone that the market can price hope long before it can price electricity.
Investors just bought a ticket to a decade they haven't lived in yet.
Finally, look past the celebrity chip names to Taiwan, where Universal Microwave Technology briefly halted trading and then resumed after announcing an acquisition designed to strengthen its high-speed transmission capabilities. The company makes microwave and millimeter wave components used in communications, satellite, and related systems, and its trading volume ran far above recent averages after the announcement. This is the kind of story that rarely gets a big headline because it has no consumer product and no charismatic founder standing in front of a giant screen. But that's exactly why it matters. Data centers, satellite networks, telecom upgrades, and advanced manufacturing all depend on connective hardware that's easy to ignore until it becomes scarce. It emerged this week because a local trading event exposed a broader industrial shift hiding inside the global race to move more information faster. Now let's wake up ready. Let's zoom out to the week ahead, because there's more than the usual 2 data points to watch this time. Start with the Fed, because it's no longer background noise. Kevin Warsh, 5 months into the job, gave his first semi-annual testimony to Congress this past week, telling lawmakers flatly that the inflation surge of the last 5 years will be a thing of the past if the Fed gets policy right. And he's already stood up 5 internal task forces to rethink everything from how the Fed communicates to how it uses economic data. That sets the stage for the FOMC's next meeting, July 28th and 29th, with the rate decision landing Wednesday the 29th at 2 p.m. Eastern. What to watch specifically isn't whether they hold. Markets were pricing roughly a 90% probability of a hold at 3.5 to 3.75% as of this past week. Watch instead whether Warsh's post-meeting language echoes his hawkish congressional tone or softens it, because that's the tell on whether a September cut stays on the table. If the statement leans hawkish, expect the dollar to firm and rate-sensitive sectors, regional banks, home builders, small-cap consumer discretionary, to lag. If it leans toward openness on cuts, watch long-duration treasuries and housing-adjacent equities catch a bid first.
A new Fed chair spending his first congressional testimony promising to end a war that's mostly already over is either confidence or theater. We'll find out which.
Then there's earnings, and the calendar stacked two of the summer's biggest reports onto a single night. Tesla and Alphabet both report Wednesday, July 22nd, after the close. For Tesla, don't watch the delivery number. That's already known and already priced. Watch automotive gross margin excluding regulatory credits, which analysts expect somewhere in the 18 to 20% range. And watch how specifically Elon Musk quantifies robotaxi and cybercab progress, since that program has missed its own targets before and shareholders are openly frustrated about it. For Alphabet, the tell is Google Cloud's growth rate, which has accelerated for 5 straight quarters to roughly $20 billion in a single quarter. Watch whether that streak holds above 30% year over year, because a deceleration there would be the first real crack in the AI cloud narrative that's been propping up the stock. Then, Thursday, July 23rd, Intel reports, and the market's already priced a fairly generous outcome. Revenue guided as high as $14.8 billion against a Wall Street consensus closer to $13 billion, with 18A yields reportedly climbing from around 65% to over 85% in the last quarter. The specific signal to watch is whether management commits to concrete foundry customer names beyond NVIDIA and OpenAI, or hedges the profitable yield timeline further into 2027. That distinction is the difference between Intel re-rating as a foundry story or getting punished as a perpetual turnaround.
$2 trillion earnings nights and a chipmaker's redemption arc all inside 4 days. Somebody in finance media is not sleeping this week.
On the data side, weekly jobless claims land Thursday as always, and the baseline matters here. Claims have been running low and stable, 208,000 for the week ending July 11th, with the 4-week average down to 214,250. That's a labor market showing no cracks yet. The specific thing to watch isn't the headline number. It's whether continuing claims, which measure people still receiving benefits, start drifting higher even as new claims stay low, because that combination usually means it's getting harder to find a new job after losing one, not that layoffs are accelerating. If continuing claims break meaningfully higher, watch consumer discretionary retail first. That's where softening hiring shows up in spending before it shows up in the jobs report headline.
A quiet labor market is either the calm before the storm or just Tuesday. History says check back in 6 weeks.
On trade, the tariff clock keeps ticking. The White House's reciprocal tariff deadline, already delayed once from July 9th, now lands August 1st, with rates as high as 50% threatened against dozens of countries and 35% specifically on Canada. The markets price this as more bark than bite, given the administration already delayed it once and has walked back steep tariffs before. But that pricing is exactly the risk. This coming week is the real negotiating window before the deadline hits, so watch specifically for bilateral announcements with the EU and Japan, since those are the two economies large enough to move currency and bond markets if talks collapse instead of resolve. If August 1st arrives, with tariffs actually taking effect on a major partner, watch the euro and the yen first, then import-heavy retailers and auto parts suppliers with thin margins to absorb the cost.
Nothing focuses a trade negotiation like a deadline nobody quite believes is real.
And in capital markets, keep an eye on Anthropic, which isn't going public this week, but is doing the work that determines how it goes public later. The company confidentially filed its S-1 back on June 1st, just after closing a $65 billion funding round at a $965 billion valuation. And bankers, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and Morgan Stanley, started early investor meetings this past week ahead of a targeted October NASDAQ listing, that could raise more than $60 billion. The strategic angle goes beyond one company. Anthropic is racing OpenAI to price first, and whichever one lists first sets the valuation benchmark the other gets measured against. The specific thing to watch this week is whether the confidential filing converts to a public S1 in the next few weeks, which is usually the signal that a roadshow timeline is firming up rather than slipping. If it prices anywhere near its current private valuation, watch the entire enterprise software and AI infrastructure complex reprice off that multiple, for better or worse. It becomes the comp every AI company gets held against for the next year.
Two AI labs racing to IPO first is a very expensive way to settle an argument about bragging rights.
My personal watch for the week. Keep an eye on whether Wednesday's Tesla and Alphabet earnings land on the same news cycle as anything unexpected out of Washington on tariffs, because markets rarely handle two major uncertainty events gracefully at once. And July 22nd is shaping up to be a crowded plate.
And that is how you wake up ready. Every January, almost on schedule, the internet develops a pulse. Searches for the word resume spike, then fall back. 12 months later, they rise again. It's the labor market's annual heartbeat. New year, new goals, new job, and the same document that somehow still says proficient in Microsoft Office. It's time for a knowledge bomb. But the resume has changed, and so has the job search. What worked in 2019 might not work today, not because employers stopped caring about experience, but because the first reader of your resume may not be a person. It may be software, scanning for skills, patterns, keywords, and evidence that you belong in the next round. The biggest shift is from credentials first hiring to skills first hiring. Employers still care where you went to school and where you worked, but increasingly, they want to know what you can actually do. That's why the modern resume often opens with a clear, visible skills section rather than a long chronological history, not a vague inventory of personality traits, but a specific summary of capabilities. Data analysis, contract negotiation, Python, project management, financial modeling, customer acquisition, cloud infrastructure. And soft skills now need receipts. Anyone can write excellent communicator or strong leader. Those phrases have become resume wallpaper. The better approach is to demonstrate the skill inside the accomplishment. Resolved a 3-month cross-departmental bottleneck by creating a weekly decision process that reduced approval time by 40%. That sentence doesn't claim leadership. It proves it. The same goes for continuous learning. A recent certification, technical course, boot camp, or specialized program can signal something a 10-year-old degree can't, that you're still adapting. The credential matters, but the message matters more. You're not simply describing what you once learned. You're showing that you keep learning. The second major change is that impact now matters more than responsibility. A job description tells an employer what you were hired to do. Your resume should explain what happened because you did it. Manage social media accounts is a responsibility. Grew Instagram followers by 50% in 6 months while increasing engagement to 5.2% is evidence. Managed a team is a responsibility. Led a 12-person team through a process redesign that reduced customer response time by 35% is a result. The useful question for every bullet point is, so what? Did you save time, reduce errors, increase revenue, keep a project from collapsing, improve retention, or turn a complicated problem into a decision someone could act on? Your daily work may have felt routine to you, but a resume isn't a diary of activity. It's an argument for value. Then there's the machine. Applicant tracking systems, or ATS software, are used to organize, search, and rank applications. They're not all identical, and not every system automatically rejects a resume, but the practical lesson is simple. If the software can't reliably read your resume, your accomplishments may never reach a human being. That makes radical minimalism surprisingly powerful. A clean, single-column document with ordinary section headings, readable fonts, and standard formatting is usually safer than a beautifully designed 2-column infographic. Graphics, text boxes, photos, decorative charts, unusual symbols, and dense layouts might look impressive on a screen while becoming scrambled data to an ATS. Your resume isn't trying to win an art competition. It's trying to survive translation. And one resume for every job is increasingly a losing strategy. The keywords in a job description are clues about how that company defines the work. If the posting repeatedly uses terms like forecasting, cross-functional, Salesforce, SQL, or regulatory compliance, and your experience genuinely includes those things, use that language, not dishonestly, precisely. One company may call something client onboarding. Another may call it implementation. A machine may not recognize that those experiences overlap unless you make the connection visible. This is also where artificial intelligence enters the picture. AI literacy is becoming less like a specialized advantage and more like basic workplace competence. You don't need to pretend you're an AI engineer, but if you use ChatGPT to research, GitHub Copilot to accelerate coding, automation tools to cut repetitive work, or industry-specific AI systems to sharpen analysis, that may belong on your resume. The important question isn't whether you've used an AI tool, it's whether you used it to produce a better result. There's a right and wrong way to use AI in the job search too. It's useful for outlining, identifying missing keywords, comparing your experience against a job description, and generating possible language. But the final document needs to sound like a person who's actually done the work. Hiring managers have gotten very good at spotting generic language. Results-driven professional, leveraging synergies, passionate self-starter. Those phrases aren't necessarily false. They're just weightless. Use AI as an assistant, not as your voice. The most practical strategy is what many job seekers now call the master resume. Build one large private document containing everything. Every role, project, accomplishment, metric, technology, certification, volunteer experience, and difficult problem you've solved. Then, for each application, make a copy and delete aggressively. The goal isn't to squeeze your entire life into 2 pages. It's to make those 2 pages feel inevitable for that particular job. And finally, the resume is no longer the whole application. It's the baseline. For technical, creative, and strategic roles, a portfolio, website, GitHub repository, writing sample, case study, or project archive can provide the proof a PDF can't. LinkedIn matters too, not because it must perfectly duplicate your resume, but because the two should tell the same story. Different emphasis is fine. Contradictions aren't. If your resume says you left a company in 2024, but LinkedIn says you still work there, the question isn't whether you're qualified anymore. It's whether you're careful. So, the modern job search isn't about producing one perfect resume and sending it everywhere. It's a system. You build a complete record of your capabilities. You identify the needs of a specific employer. You translate your experience into measurable outcomes. You make the document readable to both software and people. You use AI to improve the process, then restore your own voice. And you make sure your digital presence supports the same story. Because the resume isn't a biography. It's a carefully chosen answer to one question. Why should this company believe you can solve this particular problem? And in January, when the search bar starts beating again, that's the question worth preparing for. And that's the knowledge bomb.
Humor me. The modern news cycle has a strange investment strategy. It spends all day telling us the world's ending, then quietly buries the evidence that some things are actually improving. So let's look at the planet's underperforming assets, the ozone layer, salmon, plastic, cartilage, and ask whether we've just been holding them through a temporary downturn. The ozone layer's healing. The Antarctic ozone hole in 2025 was the 5th smallest since 1992, thanks largely to the Montreal Protocol. Humanity spotted a planetary problem, negotiated a fix, and actually followed through. A story that got less airtime than a celebrity launching an electrolyte drink. Japanese researchers, meanwhile, built a plant-based plastic that dissolves in salt water within hours, no microplastics left behind. And coho salmon returned to California's Russian River system for the first time in 3 decades, after years of habitat restoration, proof that infrastructure, not rebranding, is what actually brings things back. On the medical side, Stanford researchers found that blocking an aging-related enzyme helped regenerate cartilage in older mice, with promising early results in human tissue. And British researchers are testing a blood test that screens for signals from more than 50 cancers before symptoms even appear. None of this means the planet's fixed. These are returns on research, regulation, and restoration, the unglamorous stuff that never makes a quarterly earnings call. The planet isn't a meme stock. It's a long-duration asset, and for once, the fundamentals might be improving.
There are debates that stop your scroll, and there are debates that clear the dinner table. This is the debate that clears dinner tables. Not because anyone throws a glass of wine, they'll give it 20 minutes, but because it asks a question most of us have quietly outsourced to podcasts, personality tests, and the glow of a phone at 1 a.m. Should you examine your life relentlessly, or is that exactly how you ruin it? 2 lecterns, a half-erased whiteboard between them. The room isn't empty, it's waiting. At the lectern to my left, Socrates, barefoot, irritatingly calm, the man who could turn "How's your day?" into a deposition. At the lectern to my right, Friedrich Nietzsche, more fire than comfort, more hammer than handrail. Socrates doesn't raise his voice. He never needs to. The danger isn't ignorance, he says, not the ordinary kind, a missing fact, a wrong date. The danger is counterfeit knowledge, the beliefs you inherited so early you mistake them for your own. The career you chose because it sounded respectable, the conviction that arrived preloaded with your family, the ambition that might actually be fear wearing a nicer jacket. If you don't inspect these things, he says, they inspect you. They make your decisions long before you enjoy the pleasant illusion of deciding them yourself. The room shifts. We've all met that person. More uncomfortably, we've each been that person before lunch. For Socrates, reflection isn't scented candle introspection. It's cross-examination. What do I believe? Why do I believe it? What would change my mind? What am I conveniently failing to notice? Without that discipline, he argues, a person runs on autopilot, moved by appetite, status, resentment, habit, and the ambient weather of the crowd. And when people do real harm, they rarely wake up auditioning for the villain role. They rationalize. The examined life interrupts that machinery. It makes the executive committee inside your head show its minutes. Nietzsche waits, then smiles, as if Socrates just delivered a beautiful argument for why a horse should become an accountant. Reason is useful, he grants. You want a bridge designed with reason, a surgeon armed with it, but you've quietly promoted reason from a tool to a sovereign, and once reason is sovereign, every instinct needs papers in order. Desire must justify itself. Courage must survive a risk committee. The greatest human acts, Nietzsche says, don't emerge from a fully audited spreadsheet of motives. Art doesn't. Love doesn't. Standing up when it would be safer to sit does not. Life often demands a leap before certainty clears its throat. Then he lands the first real blow. You mistake hesitation for virtue, he tells Socrates, because you were drawn to a kind of person already cut off from instinct, uncertain, resentful, needing an argument for every appetite because they no longer trust their own vitality. Reflection, he says, can become a compensation strategy. The mind turns its flashlight inward not to see clearly, but because it's afraid of what's outside. A murmur moves through the room. It's a brutal proposition because it has the shape of something modern. We track our sleep, name our trauma responses, optimize our routines, and then wonder why we're tired. Socrates doesn't flinch. You've confused examination with paralysis, he says. The point of questioning yourself isn't to become a permanent committee meeting. It's to act better once you act. A pilot runs a pre-flight check not because she hates flying, but because she respects what flying badly costs. Then he pushes harder. Instinct isn't some innocent animal force corrupted by thought, he argues. It can be generous, but it can also be tribal, cruel, and remarkably skilled at calling its own aggression authenticity. A man says, I'm just being true to myself when he means I'd rather not be accountable. A nation says we're following our nature when it means we found a poetic way to excuse dominance. The room goes still. If you reject self-examination, Socrates asks, how do you tell courage from recklessness, creation from vanity, fate from a pattern you're too proud to change? Nietzsche doesn't get defensive. He concedes the weakness immediately. Instinct is no guarantee of goodness, he says. People have done monstrous things while feeling perfectly natural, perfectly certain, perfectly alive. His point isn't that every impulse deserves obedience. It's that a life built entirely around suspicion of oneself goes bloodless. The goal isn't blind instinct. It's cultivated instinct. Strength trained by experience, taste, and consequence until it's more reliable than a rule book. The healthy person doesn't deny their darkness, he says. They integrate it. Anger becomes courage. Ambition becomes creation. Even failure becomes material instead of evidence for self-contempt. Then Nietzsche turns Socrates' own weapon around. Constant examination has a vanity of its own, he says. It assumes that if you look hard enough, you'll find a clean, coherent self underneath, labeled and waiting. Maybe there's no answer key. Maybe a person isn't a problem to solve, but a force to shape. Socrates admits his own weakness in return. Reflection can become performance, he says. A person can spend so much time examining their soul they use self-knowledge as another way to avoid risk and responsibility. Knowing why you're difficult isn't the same as becoming less difficult. The room laughs. That one's paid rent in all our heads. But he insists the answer to bad reflection isn't no reflection. It's honest reflection with stakes. Not what does this feeling say about my brand, but what must I do differently now? He doesn't promise a spotless self. He promises a more conscious relationship with the forces already steering you. So there they stand. Socrates asking us to question the driver. Nietzsche asking whether the driver might be the only one willing to leave the driveway. Here's what they were actually arguing about once you strip away the lecterns. Socrates was asking, how do you keep your worst instincts from running your life unexamined? Nietzsche was asking, how do you keep your best instincts from being strangled before they act? Those aren't the same question, and that's why neither man ever really answers the other. They're aiming at two different failure modes, not one shared target. In practical terms, that split still runs through how people actually live. The person who never questions anything becomes captive to inherited scripts, career, politics, grievance, dressed up as free choice. The person who questions everything can talk themselves out of every leap that ever mattered, love included. Most people need both instruments at different moments, and the skill worth building isn't picking a side. It's noticing, in real time, which failure mode you're closer to today. And that is the greater debate.
Let's invent again. Karl Auer von Welsbach built a fortune from a category most people would have dismissed as lab residue. He spent his early career in the strange, stubborn territory of rare earth elements, materials with names nobody could pronounce, properties few people understood, and commercial uses that didn't yet exist. This wasn't the glamorous side of the Second Industrial Revolution. Steel had railroads, oil had spectacle, electricity had Edison, rare earths had cloudy solutions, spectral lines, and chemists arguing over whether a supposedly single substance was actually several elements tangled together. Welsbach was unusually well prepared for that argument. Born in Vienna in 1858, the son of the director of the Imperial Printing House, he had enough stability to chase an intellectual obsession, but not so much of a predetermined industrial empire that he could just inherit one. He studied chemistry in Vienna and then Heidelberg under Robert Bunsen, and became absorbed by the problem of separating rare earths, which weren't rare so much as notoriously difficult to isolate. They traveled together in ores, masquerading as one another, defeating anyone who expected chemistry to behave neatly. In 1885, Welsbach showed that didymium, long treated as a single element, was actually two, neodymium and praseodymium. That discovery matters less because anyone listening is shopping for neodymium, and more because it reveals the pattern of his mind. He didn't look at an accepted category and ask how to compete inside it. He looked at a muddle and asked whether the muddle itself was the opportunity. Then he aimed that knowledge at one of the largest markets on Earth, light. At the time, gas lighting was everywhere. It lit streets, factories, stores, homes, theaters, and the growing cities of Europe and America. But it was dim, hot, inefficient, and increasingly threatened by electric light. The broad assumption was obvious. Electricity was the future. Gas was the old system, still large, but on borrowed time. Welsbach's first big move wasn't a new energy source. It was making the old one dramatically better. His gas mantle was a tiny piece of treated fabric placed over a gas flame. When heated, the fabric burned away and left behind a delicate mineral skeleton that glowed brilliantly. The flame itself wasn't doing the visual work. The rare earth compounds were converting heat into far more intense white light, a modest-looking object that changed the economics of illumination. He didn't beat electricity by claiming gas was more modern. He beat it, for a time, on the only metric customers could see immediately: more usable light for the fuel and infrastructure already in place. His first version wasn't a triumph. Early mantles were fragile and commercially disappointing, the part that tends to disappear when history turns inventors into statues. He had the chemistry, but chemistry wasn't the product. The product had to survive manufacturing, shipping, installation, heat, customer misuse, and competition. So he iterated, eventually landing on a formulation overwhelmingly based on thorium oxide with a touch of cerium oxide. The result was brighter and more practical, and it bought gas lighting another decade or two of relevance. Cities and households could defer expensive electrical conversion, and gas companies staring at obsolescence suddenly had a credible upgrade path. That's the more interesting version of invention. The breakthrough wasn't just a material, it was an installed base upgrade. Every founder talks about disruption, but Welsbach's lesson is that disruption isn't always the best commercial posture. Sometimes the better move is to find a massive system that's about to be written off, identify its weakest performance variable, and make it good enough to earn another decade of life. That's a very modern business model. It's the chip that lets an old device class stay viable, the software layer that makes a legacy system suddenly measurable, the battery chemistry that makes an existing vehicle platform useful before the world's finished building the charging network. There's often more value in rescuing a giant installed base than in announcing the next clean sheet future. Welsbach also treated patents as operating leverage, not trophies. He patented compositions, devices, and processes across multiple countries, partnered with capital and manufacturing talent, built gas mantle businesses, later founded what became Treibacher Chemische Werke, and helped establish the industrial lineage behind Osram. A discovery is knowledge. A product is knowledge embedded in a reliable object. A business is knowledge embedded in supply chains, quality control, distribution, and customer habits, and Welsbach kept moving down that chain. He kept inventing too, because he never confused one product with one identity. As electricity advanced, he worked on metal filament lamps, including osmium filaments that helped move lighting past carbon. Then came ferrocerium, the pyrophoric alloy behind the modern lighter flint. The spark from a lighter today is quite literally a fragment of his rare earth expertise still hiding in plain sight. A lesser inventor might have seen three unrelated businesses in glow, filament, and spark. Welsbach saw one accumulating capability, deep command of a difficult material family, continuously translated into products. That's what real technical moats often look like before they're obvious. Not a single patent with a cinematic origin story, but years of process knowledge, purification tricks, and narrow expertise redeployed across markets. The same pattern shows up today around advanced batteries, specialty semiconductors, and the rare earth supply chain itself. The world celebrates the finished device. The economic power often sits with whoever understands the inconvenient material inside it. There's a caution in his story, too. The industrial use of thorium later created environmental and waste management consequences that the commercial logic of the time didn't fully price. Progress isn't a moral alibi. A material breakthrough can be economically brilliant and still leave costs for someone else to manage later. Welsbach became wealthy, was made a baron, and left companies whose descendants outlived him. But the enduring point isn't that chemistry made one man rich. It's that he found value where the world saw inconvenience, then refused to leave that value sitting in the laboratory. The next great opportunity may not arrive labeled as a revolution. It may look like a neglected input, a costly byproduct, an aging network, or a technical nuisance everyone's learned to work around. The builders who matter are often the ones who skip the glamorous question, what comes next, and ask the less glamorous one instead. What already exists, at enormous scale, that could become radically more valuable if one stubborn problem finally got solved. That's it for another episode of Wealth and Means, advice dressed up like hard work.
We hope you enjoyed the arc. From quiet trade corridors to a gas mantle nobody asked for, enabling layers hiding in plain sight, and old systems worth one more upgrade before they're worth replacing. The pattern was simple. Value hides underneath.
Subscribe, rate, and share this episode. It helps more than you think.
We do this for you to help you have a better week, a sharper mind, and maybe even a longer attention span.
And a special thanks to our sponsor, agentweekly.ai.
Till next time, stay curious.
Stay kind.
And keep compounding.